Oh, good morning. This is August 15th, and it's Saturday. It's a bit nippy out, and again, what can I say? The air quality is still in the yellow stage. My podcast today is going to be a little bit of scattered, but I guess as you're my audience, you know that it's a bit scattered. However, there have been some things that usually happen after I meet with people or I have some sort of epiphany on what I'm going to put on my podcast. So, most people, I think, and I hope that are listening, when I talk about recovery and mental health, and I look at people who, like say Daniel Smith, who doesn't have the concept of addiction and recovery. Or maybe she does, maybe it's a fringe thing, but but I think people need to really look at people who've recovered and their skill set and how they did it. And even their approach to the way they see life in general. I just get totally fed up again with non-Indigenous people, and they're usually white, who come into our communities and and sort of practice like they come in with these big, like they get this big amount of money, over 100,000, maybe, really outrageous, and so yes, they have a mountain of experience, but they what's that word I keep on, grifters. I just found out like this one grifter got fired. He was employed within my community, lasted a couple of years, and they found out like that he wasn't looking after his mental health, and yet that's part of his practice was to help with programming and stuff, and the job required, like there's a mental health worker that comes in every week to help decompress staff because of the high stress level. Yet this individual, just it's sort of like abandoned everybody and just took it upon himself to not look after himself. Okay, because his parents had passed away, health conditions. When I talk about Indigenous people and like how many times we grieve when someone passes, and people like white people look, oh my goodness, you poor thing. But the reality of it is like, come on. This guy, yes, you lost your family members, and I mean, I could go on. There was a lady that in her 30s, she lost her partner after they'd known each other from high school, and then I guess they lived in a relationship for about 6 years. He passed away from some sort of brain injury, and she went on. She'd start her own podcast, Instagram, social media, got garnered about maybe 70,000 followers, all because she's grieving. Now, it's one thing when you come to work in an Indigenous community, and yes, you're human and you grieve, but the reality of it is like, what did you think you were doing? You come here with this. One of my late parents' friends, his son, was talking to me, and he says, my parents, they just have this religiosity. He says, they sleep in separate bedrooms, and on Monday, my mother would go with the girls, and she'd get drunk, come back late at night, when we're all asleep. She says, but that's how the marriage was. It was just a married, it's one thing you have a married couple who have a difficult time with intimacy, and yet in public present themselves as a religious, God-fearing couple trying to promote mental health when they are having crisis in their own private home. Again, white privilege or savior complex. Some notion like, oh, I don't have to deal with my addiction, or I don't have to deal with my mental health because, these people don't know me. They just see the whiteness of my skin, and, that old theory of like, oh, well, we're smarter than most people. Like, people have bought into this colonial mindset that when you have different skin color, it automatically reflects your brain capacity. It boggles my mind. And it gets me upset every time I hear a white person comes into our communities, either as a social worker, mental health worker, some work, and what are they doing? They're pretending to be mentally well, and so they, yes, of course you give them the benefit of the doubt and they work for a while, but you know it's a snowball effect. All the pieces started falling apart, and now like this individual, like that huge amount of income is taken away. How much more devastating is it? He had years to go to therapy on the job site and chose not to. That completely boggles my mind, especially when you're taught that you're coming into an Indigenous community and you're supposed to be there to help the Indigenous people, and instead what's happening? We're helping them, not in terms of anything that we have to offer in the healing modalities, but in terms of financial gain, which really pisses me off. Because again, that's what they call it, a gift. Shit. Ugh. Grifting. Ugh. No, it's amazing. It totally amazes me. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about too is a little different, but again, too, it in the same genre too. Like, when people ask me to come and talk about art, or like how my perception, or how my understanding of like, say, the concept of water is life, or sovereignty over our water rights, sovereignty, and in how before colonization, like what did it look like for Indigenous people and the relationship with water. The reality of it is like, I can only talk for the seven council fires of the Osheti-Shikowi, which is Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, because I was raised in that culture that everything is tied to water. Even Wea is associated with water. The language itself is around water. Sweat and Sundance is all around water. The whole concept, like, this is our life. Oh, it's amazing how it encompasses everything, and yet our whole value system in terms of school curriculum, even how people have accountability for spirituality. One time, my late mother and her Indian residential school childhood friend, her brother was having Sundance in British Columbia. Now, my mother's older, okay, and of course, they were sitting by the campfire. We're all sitting there having a cup of tea, and my mom and her friend poured the tea that was, just the bottom of the cup on the ground. And there was a white woman who started to mansplain my mother and her friend, who were elders. This is the arrogance of white women. She says, "You're not supposed to throw water on the ground." And my mother and her friend, Mariel, they just looked at each other just like, because this is Mariel's brother's Sundance. And we have a white woman who's supposed to be there helping volunteer, mansplaining, explaining to Dakota elder women, "Thou shalt not." See, that to me that's the critical, or my take on people who come into communities and really feel like they have the privilege to mansplain us, as if we're so savage-like. They don't really know that they're doing it, and bless their hearts. I've always been around white people, and sometimes people say to me, "Well, why don't you say something?" I'm going, no, I've learned a long time ago that if they're going to create this narrative, let them stew in their own fat. Let them suffer in their own ignorance. Because at some point, karma hits them like a ton of bricks. And karma has to do with action. So when you go around poking up someone's philosophy or way of life, and you're applying it to your life, but yet there's no collective and holistic approach to it, or even history, then it's going to bite you. It's going to bite you where it hurts the most. Anyway, that's my little rant from the beginning of my podcast, and I'm sorry that I ranted and raved, but it's just the notion that you spend so much time talking to white people, both men and women, and then what happens is they twist it around for their own pleasure. They like like some of the podcasts and the TikToks that I've been listening to as well, like there are discoveries of female anatomy, different things that women in terms of healthy sexuality is normal, but because it's all around the science of men, it stresses women out psychologically. So now women are sort of coming to this epiphany and going, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know." But yes, when you think about it and you go, "Oh, I like the company of women," because we're set up that way. Psychologically, we're set our hormones are set up that way. Men are different, but try and convince a man that it's different, especially when a man thinks like he's really hot shit. Like again, I can't change the way women look at certain men. If women look at a man and think that he's attractive, that's their opinion. But the reality of it is, like, some men, like, they just go, "Yeah, I know I'm attractive. I know women look at me." And I'm going, yes, from your perspective, because men, their testosterone and even how they have pleasure is based on that. Whereas women really don't, don't need it. There's a TikTok that I'm going to play of this lady. She talks about it, and I hope you get the gist of it, at least.
All the information we have on our biology is from a male body. 2, when they did study our bodies, they found that the female nervous system regulates to oxytocin, not dopamine. So while males feel regulated and grounded and whole in getting things done and pushing and succeeding, women, female bodies, feel grounded and whole and regulated through pleasure, through co-regulation, through connection, through relational dynamics, through touch, through beauty. Number 3, and this is the kicker, dopamine actually depletes oxytocin in the female body. Science found that the more female bodies push and run dopamine pathways, it depletes oxytocin, pleasure, love, connection. So if you're a woman who feels that the harder you try, the worse you feel, listen to this. It is so imperative for every woman and man to understand and prioritize replenishing oxytocin in the female body. And I've seen this so many times in myself and in my female clients. When you start to move from a dopamine pathway into oxytocin, the thing that you are going to hit up against is shame. Because we've all culturally valued dopamine and success so much, men and women need to both understand that dopamine in excess in a female body is making us sick. It's making us crazy. It's making us feel disconnected and alone. The easiest way for a woman to start to shift out of dopamine and start to prioritize and habitualize oxytocin and pleasure in her body is with other women. We burn through the shame together. We can validate and relate and mirror each other in these new pathways. 1, the female nervous system with...
So, again, we're set up different. And so even when you're thinking of matriarchy, that's historical. It's, again, when I talk about the female and male anatomy, I'm going, where's the G-spot? Now, even that, I'm not a guy, so, I don't have the body parts. But tell me if I'm wrong. Sometimes people say the G-spot is in the scrotum, like it's between the scrotum and the anus, and inside. So that little pleasure part there, it stimulates. However, another critique was that the G-spot in the men is inside the tip of the penis. Okay, so again, anatomy. Now, I spent 2 years drawing anatomy at art school. Like, it was just like drawing nudes. And I always used to wonder, why in art school do we have to draw nudes, sketch them? Like, you have 3 minutes, bang, you sketch it out. You know, the model moves, and I always wondered why. So the thing is, like, because you're using formation, you're doing the lines, you're focusing on what's happening on the piece of paper. You're not looking at the anatomy and getting any type of arousal. It's just the focus on drawing. And again too, like form and shades and stuff like that. So again too, like when women are together, it's that connection. There's a connection and there's company, like you feel connected, like you belong to a family. And again, this shame and guilt. I think a lot of times when men or misogyny hate women, they really feed into that disconnection, and they really want the woman to be alone. And like the lady says, it drives women crazy. But yet, men want to say, "Oh, she's hysterical," like in art history. Oh, there was dedicate. There was a whole lesson about male artists who just painted and were focused more on the hysteria of women. It's amazing to me the coercive control throughout history that men have had over women. And a lot of things too that I didn't really understand too until
the female nervous system was not
until well, like I started thinking about men who cheat. And okay, so here's the last tape was from Anna Villa, Villa. That was her on Instagram. Now this next one, her name is End Coercion so it's END underscore coercive, CORERVICIVE underscore CONN. She's explaining coercive control traps. Now, why am I talking about coercive control traps or coercive ways of control? Is because when I've talked to women who've had affairs, and they think it's like true love, or like the wife did not give a damn about her husband, he was sad all the time, just like there is a like what can I say? I think a lot of times as women we got hooked into these things. But listen to this.
You've probably heard coercive control referred to as emotional abuse or psychological abuse. And coercive control does include the emotional and psychological weapons the quicksand model names. But the term coercive control is more all-encompassing than emotional and psychological abuse. And the framework of coercive control was designed to point the court in the right direction. When emotional abuse or psychological abuse are raised in court, assessments turn away from the coercive controller's actions and to the target's state of mind. Questions turn to the target's credibility and the target's perfectly rational fear from living in the quicksand of coercive control gets reframed and recorded as instability or alienation. Coercive control looks elsewhere. It looks for the pattern of the perpetrator's coercive and controlling conduct. It names what the coercive controller did over time and what they stole, the target's autonomy and liberty. If you have been assessed instead of believed, if you've been asked what is wrong with you instead of what was done to you, that was all part of the coercive controller's strategy to make you the focus so they could keep you trapped and prevent your escape. The words emotional abuse don't make the quicksand visible, but the framework of coercive control does. Coercive control moves the professional's eyes off the target and onto the coercive controller. Professionals, if you use it in your notes, your reports, and your testimony, you can help stop the harm, hold the coercive controller accountable, and hand the target back their freedom.
I just like when I talk about facing your perpetrator, especially in court, and you stand there and you say, "You hurt me." See, it's one thing to be afraid of them, but it's another thing to actually face them and say to their face, "You thought I enjoyed what you did. You hurt me." Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, everything. Like you like this is the because again, this is the time when you're given a voice and you're being validated by the courts because the person has been found guilty. It's the victim statement. And so you're breaking free of this coercive control. And the thing is, like, even if, like, I've never been married, I've never been in a relationship where I've had I've been a battered woman. No, I haven't. The reality of coercive control is something that I believe as women, like for me as a child, a teenager and a young adult, and just seeing the relationships of women and their partners, like that it was assessed as being normalized. So coercive control, even in the sense of like it's okay to that you're consenting. Yes, it's one thing to consent to have an affair with a married man. It's one thing to consent to having children with this married man. But at the same time, this married man has a partner who also has engaged in having children with said partner. So you look at the man and you say coercive control. And then who's participating in this control scheme? That's a really hard pill to swallow, especially if you're a woman and you've taken part in such manipulation and control. Let's see here. I don't know if this...
You've probably heard...
Yeah, so again, let's see what this is.
Feminism is not a Western invention. Feminism was not invented by American women, as many people think. No, feminism embedded in the culture and in the struggle of all women all over the world. We have to liberate women economically, socially, psychologically, physically, religiously. So our feminism, we called ourselves historical, that's the slogan of our group, historical socialist feminist. Because we studied history and we understood that the oppression of women is not specific of Egypt or Arab people. It is historical. It is everywhere, in every country. Women were rebelling in all religions, in India, Egypt, under Hinduism, under Judaism, under Christianity or Islam. Women were fighting for their right. And we call ourselves socialists because we are against class oppression. We are against capitalism because capitalism is linked to patriarchy. We are against patriarchy, not men. We are not against men. We are against patriarchy, the patriarchal system, the domination of men in religion, in economy, in culture, everything, in science. That's why we call ourselves historical socialist feminists.
And this organisation terrified the men in power, didn't it?
Terrified, yes, of course. It terrified them. That's why they banned it. And in fact, we were about to create a revolution because we had 40% men. We were not all women.
Men were joining too.
We had 40% men and young men very enthusiastic about these points.
Why were they joining? Why were men joining?
Because they felt that men are oppressed by patriarchy too.
No,
feminism is not.
That's on Instagram, and it's the Spearhead. That's their handle, their social handle. And the lady who is talking, her name is Nawal, capital L-E-L, capital S-A-A-D-A-W-I-I. So when I talk about, like when I'm talking from an Indigenous point of view, that's just because I'm Indigenous. What she's talking about is all women. And so the generalization of like what oxytocin, dopamine, just the study, like the whole science of physiology and medicine was based on the male body instead of the female body. So the more women became educated and the more they started talking about what they've lived through and what they know about their bodies, it has to strike a chord with people. Again, because the woman, the first 5 years of every human life is based on the relationship they have with their mother, the imprint. And so if the mom is under patriarchy, she's raised, that child is seeing that. Or if the mom is matriarchy, the child also experiences and sees that. So a lot of this deconstruction of self-reflection in terms of trying to, like the historical parts of what makes you who you are today is important, not just for women, but also for men. So that's why when I talk about eliminating self-defeating behavior, it's a part of that too, because we tend to have this self-talk like I always do this, or the repeated language of certain vocabulary that we keep on in our minds. And so how do we deconstruct that? And there's so many gurus and mental health workers and people who've come out of recovery. And I had a meeting about water, and the one lady said to me, she was an American citizen, she says, well, this lady said that they collect rocks by the river, and I said, well, that's her. I said, that's her way of healing, so you have to respect that. So like I said, the practitioner or the individual who has found a stepping stone in healing, that's her journey. And if it works for her and she wants to share that modality or that process, then honor that. Because again, however she is in terms of like engaging with other women, that's her process. I know it's really difficult too for me, because sometimes, like, I talk to my sister. I haven't talked to my sister in decades. She's a very staunch Mormon. And I made a comment to her one time about women. Like, I enjoy being around women, like in terms of the intimacy of just sharing. Like that, again, the oxytocin. I was like, that's my experience. I wasn't talking about sexual, physical stuff like like when I talk about fantasy, and then I talk about like we'll call it limerence. The fantasy part is healthy, okay? The limerence part isn't. So as a woman, if you're around, like, you're fantasizing and you're sharing the fantasy with other women, then it increases the oxytocin. Limerence, however, is more of the destructive side of like obsessive compulsive, and like there's a difference, because the fantasy is like just having a fantasy of, say, having sex with person X. Limerence isn't about having a fantasy about having sex with X. Limerence is obsessing strategies to seduce, covet, manipulate, own, and control X, which again is based on fallacy, because that person is unobtainable. And the more energy that's put into constructing like this building block of strategies, the deeper the limerence is. That's why it needs a professional to help the individual who's constructed this fortress. Like, the individual themselves has to dismantle it brick by brick. If it's not guided, and if a person doesn't understand it, they're going to attach fantasy with that. When they're the difference is the fantasy, you're not acting on it, but the limerence, you are. So, and again, I'll use the analogy of Psychology 101. This is a very hard premise to understand, but this is how it was explained to me in basic psychology. A human being thinks of a child and thinks of having sex with a child. Is that sinful? Is that evil? Now, a person, again, thinks of having sex with a child and then actually does it. Is that evil? Is that sinful? What is forgivable and unforgivable? So forgivable is the fantasy or thinking of having sex with a child. It's the action that is unforgivable. When a person goes from steps from this one construct into the next, that's the shift that I want to talk about, and I try to explain the difference with limerence. Fantasy is the thought. Limerence is the action or the need to create your own karma. And that's the danger of it, like, because it can be, it's so overwhelming. When I was sexually active, I found it really discomforting when young men who I'd never even had sex with, who would be obsessed with me. And I'm going, why? You don't know me? Like, sometimes, I've had to be just straight with men. They propose to have an affair, and I'm going, why? I said, you don't know me, and I don't love you. I'm going to use you and abuse you, and I'm going to twist you all out of shape if I have sex with you. And they're looking at me going, no, you won't. I said, no, I will. I will. Like, hello, I know myself. I know myself as a woman. I know what limerence is. I know what fantasy is. As long as I'm in this fantasy part of my life, I'm safe. But if I'm going into this limerence stage where there's no love, there's only coercive control involved with me or that person, it's not going to be a healthy, it's going to be a traumatic bond. Whereas the fantasy part is healthy because it's a bond. It's not based on trauma. And again, it's based on open communication with boundaries and assessments from both people. That's why sometimes when I talk about mental health workers or people who've studied psychology, who come into Indigenous communities with this notion of fantasy and like, oh, I've got this magic wand, I'm going to heal you here, tap, 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 go around tapping everybody as if he's healing or she's healing. And the reality of it is like, they're living in the fantasy, and yet they're not looking after their mental health because in their private life, they're in limerence. It's for whatever the addiction is. Like a white acquaintance who ghosted me said we all have addictions. And like some could rationalize it away. For myself, I try not to. I try to stay on with my feet on the ground. And I think for that, like I said, I enjoy the company of women because I get to talk to other women, and either we jokingly talk about the fantasy, or there's something that, like, we're producing that oxytocin. Whereas men, I think it gets into the more dangerous parts, like of pornography, and like it's here.
I was a university researcher addicted to porn for 15 years. This is how porn destroys your brain. First of all, pornography is a supernormal stimulus. There's nothing in this world that matches the level of stimulation pornography provides to your brain and body. That causes 4 specific changes. Number 1 is desensitization. You build a threshold or a tolerance, and so you start to watch more obscure content and stuff that you never really thought you'd watch. Number 2 is sensitization. Okay, this is where you get cues and cravings from things that are ordinary to a regular person, but to you, they trigger porn viewing. The third is a reduced stress response. Your capacity for stress and life in general plummets because your brain is being warped by pornography. Number 4 is hypofrontality. Okay, this is reduced circulation to this part of your brain, responsible for self-worth, self-esteem, long-term decision-making, and all of that stuff. Now, the good news is that all of these effects can be reversed. I know it personally. I've been clean of porn for 10 years, and I've used some very specific tactics to help 1,400 plus men quit pornography. If you need some help, follow my page from...
See, And this guy, his name is Satyamesam. Okay, and so that's again a male perspective. So
I've been clean of porn for 10 years. I've helped 1,400 men quit
Same
pornography
fellow.
in the last 8. And here are 3 ways that you can rewire your brain from pornography. Number 1, you need to optimize your technology. Turn off notifications, get rid of social media, news, any of what I like to call kind of the gateway opportunities. Anything that you know eventually springboards you into doing the thing, get rid of it. Okay, get rid of it or tone it down significantly. Number 2, talk to somebody, okay? The longer you suffer in silence and isolation, the worse this problem gets. We all want to think we can figure it out on our own and then we'll tell the story. You gotta tell the story first and then you figure it out after. It's counterintuitive, okay? Number 3, charge your phone outside your bedroom. The most popular time to view pornography is between 10 o'clock at night and midnight, and 91% of porn viewership happens on the phone. So by charging your phone outside of the bedroom, you literally stack the odds in your favor of having a clean night, and more importantly, rewiring your brain from this terrible, terrible substance so you can be a clean man. Now, if you're looking to go beyond just the initial rewiring, you want to live a life of freedom, check out my page. I post daily.
So again, he's promoting himself, but it's the basic premise of things and strategies to find, like, to balance your central nervous system. And like I said, it's a you sense it and you see it in people, especially like when people grieve. Like your body just heats up, and because if you're involved in addiction, and your central nervous system is not balanced and it's irregular, when stress hits, when life hits, and you don't have the like, you're not balanced, it just triggers your central nervous system, and you're like in this flight or fright response. The whole point of finding somebody to talk to, and again, all this has to do with finding people you trust and talking it out with the individual. I know some people, for me, I know when I start talking, they get uncomfortable. With men and my talking to men, it's like I'm in a relationship. And for me, it's like, no, I've got to tell you this because I don't trust you. So for me, it's like a process of like, I've got to trust this person, so I've got to talk to them. And the thing is, with this is the practice amongst women. When we're talking to other women, we're establishing trust. At the same time, too, we're also going to be guarded. But no matter how extreme or how fantastic or the fantasy is, the reality of it is like, I'm coping with this feeling that I have. It's natural. I just need to, it's like a roller coaster. You're at the top of the roller coaster and you're going down into the gully, and you're going to be going back up on the hill again. So, like, again, the roller coaster of oxytocin. It's the part where you've got too much dopamine for women that we become unbalanced. Whereas with men, it's the opposite. They become more balanced with the more dopamine. And that's why I think when it comes to pornography, it's so addictive for men. Now, I'm not too sure if there are some things too that I did put in here that had to do with other topics, but I'm hoping some of the topics that I did post will resonate.
So what happens when a target of coercive control finally tells somebody? Well, the coercive controller has spent years camouflaged to appear credible to the very people that they approach for help. Some call this the smear campaign. Now, that term names the outcome, but not the pattern that created it. In the quicksand model, it's called the double team, and it includes the coercive controller's entire pattern, not just their final attack. Long before the target reached for help, the coercive controller presented themselves to friends, colleagues, and family as the caring one. In their false narrative, the targeted victim had a problem, and the coercive controller was patiently helping them. None of it happened in front of the target, so the targeted victim ends up defending themselves against false accusations they didn't even know existed. If people who once trusted you have gone quiet, and if you've stopped talking about your experience because everyone reacts badly, that was part of the coercive controller's strategy. Quicksand was made to look like solid ground, but once trapped, the harder a targeted victim struggles to be believed, the deeper they sink. That is what happens when you're defending a war you didn't even know you were in. Professionals, if you examine the coercive controller's conduct as closely as the target's account, the record stops the war, holds the coercive controller accountable, and returns the target's dignity and freedom. Beyond the Bruise, our newly updated free guide for professionals is available in our bio.
Now, again, this is why it bothers me when I get non-Indigenous therapists or social workers, is because they don't know they're also practicing coercive control because they're blindsiding their own clients. See, it's so subtle, yet at the same time, like, there are therapists who go to therapists because there has to be some form of, like, how do we deal with stuff? How do we deal as healers? How do we deal with things, especially
the language that we use around sex, getting fucked, railed, drilled, boned, the fact that all of this language is incredibly violent and graphic in its language is intentional. It's about creating the understanding that sex is a defiling act towards women, that when a woman has sex, she has been defiled in some way, she has been, her value, her worthiness has been damaged in some way, and it's about maintaining this order where men do benefit from sex, where men's dominance is protected as being the ones that are able to create that defiling, that by a man sexually engaging with a woman, he has hurt her, tainted her in some way. With this understanding, women can't fuck if we are thinking about it through the sense that sex is something that is defiling women, that through this current world order that we have, patriarchy, men's dominance, whatever, women have not been given the social cachet or the leverage necessary in order to be the ones that can, like, administer defiling or degradation to men through having sex. And if the term fuck is like a proxy for that, then it is logical then to say that, like, women can't fuck. Women get fucked, which is seen as decreasing her value, hence a shaming around body counts and an obsession with virginity. Sex is seen as a defiling act, which creates the obvious conclusion that a woman would never desire sex. Why would you desire your own undoing? There's a desexualization that happens to women, an assumption that women would never desire sex independently, autonomously, because sex is defiling. So, like I said, why would you desire your own undoing? It's this weird way that we both hypersexualize women and desexualize them, where we see women only through a sexual lens, but then also don't allow women to have a independent sexuality. That was quote. My new Substack essay. The language that...
So her handle is Paris MWENDWA. That's PARISMWENDWA. When I was in my 20s, I attended a gender studies course at a university, and it was a group support for just young women. And the majority of women that were there, at least, like I'll say there were 10 or 13 of us. Out of that group, half were engaged. You got to understand, this was a Mormon university too. So again, this whole notion of finding a husband. Now, why am I bringing that up is because even with gender studies, and again, a lot of this ritual abuse and coercive control over women and children is historic. Okay, so you have to sort of deconstruct what ritual abuse is, and you have to also deconstruct gender roles. Okay, that's why, like, when we use the baseline as bisexuality, that's deconstructing our gender roles. So when we, in theory, try to do some self-reflection as well as understanding, like as this lady put, sometimes just talking about women having sexual fantasy is a taboo. Like, because, we're not supposed to feel, we're not supposed to masturbate, we're not supposed to, engage in, our bodies. Again, what the hell? When I did the gender studies course, we had to do words like, how many words describe women? Bitch, slut, whore, like all that shit. And then when you have to define men, what? Bastards? Like when we lined up all the words, socialized words, there was more degradation, more of oppression of the gender of females in just the language itself. So I really appreciated this young woman talking about this because, it's one thing to make sex sound dirty, and for women to just like, I can't talk about this because I only have sex with my husband, or like it's like the control or coercive control over, like you should not be talking about this with other women. Like I said, when I said to my sister that I enjoyed having discussions with women because I felt safe. Now, at the time, I thought maybe it was because I had been sexually assaulted like decades before. But my sister turned it around because of religiosity and said that I was gay. Now, understand this. I'm so naive when it comes to bisexuality. And I've been, like, when I say I haven't been sexually active in 50 years, like I'm not kidding. I didn't even understand masturbation or pornography until the pandemic. Like, that's how naive I am. And that's the more critical thing, because now I'm going, this is what our children are exposed to. There's a catalyst of why I do this podcast, because like I've been cloistered or sheltered, all because of coercive control. Like, here's my sister wanting to put me in a little slot because I'm not married, I'm not sealed in the Mormon temple. Like, it's just outrageous that because in Mormonism it's a taboo to be homosexual. Again, historical, the history of oppression. And it's not just, like I said, not just me, it's all women. That's why the things that give us some balance, our energy, our central nervous system energy, is the oxytocin, not the dopamine. So the more we connect as women and the more we talk about our sexuality, we become healthy. We become healthier. And the more we understand why men have this drive, this, like I said, this, I didn't even know that you could get porn on the internet until, like I said, until the pandemic.
Why is it so hard to heal from borderline personality disorder? As a psychiatrist, the way that I explain it is it's because borderline personality disorder is not one thing. It's more or less three things. So a process of healing in borderline personality disorder involves a process of healing each individual thing. The first thing is a person's concept of self. To understand this, we have to think about a person's earliest life. Oftentimes, people with borderline personality disorder were brought up in a very invalidating environment. Not just invalidating, not consistently invalidating, but inconsistently invalidating in a very unpredictable way. And this was going on in a person's earliest life when they were trying to define who they are and how they relate to others. Therefore, they developed a very unstable sense of self, a very unstable self-image, because it was hard for them as a tiny child to stabilize their identity relative to the stable identities of others, because those others in their lives did not present a stable interactive front. So when someone is trying to heal from borderline personality disorder, one of the things they're trying to do is in some way stabilize stabilize or solidify that concept of self. The second thing that they must heal is the way that they pattern their interactions with others. In that earliest life, when somebody has such a difficult environment to cope with, they learn to survive less than to thrive. And it becomes a game of threat detection. Now, when you're dealing with a threat, you want to immediately categorize it. Is it all good or is it all bad? If it's all bad, I need to cope with it to save my life. And that's why relationships for people with borderline personality disorder can be remarkably unstable, because their brain is automatically categorizing others as all good or all bad in order to protect themselves from the possible downside of getting that judgment wrong. That is a developmental foundation of something called splitting, or black or white thinking, which is a hallmark of borderline personality disorder. So part of the healing process is learning that nobody is all good or all bad, and that's a really, really hard lesson to learn. The third massive healing effort that a person would be making is distress tolerance. One of the hallmarks of borderline personality disorder can be self-injury, self-harm, or explosive and unpredictable behavior. But folks come by this very honestly, because these are honest attempts to react to the true volume of emotion they're experiencing, which again came from an early life necessity to survive. It takes a lot of trust and effort to try other things, to rely on other people, to develop an entirely new system of distress tolerance that is safer and more. Taken together, this is why healing from borderline personality disorder isn't like healing a cut. It's a bit more like trying to build a house of cards on the deck of a ship during a storm in the middle of the ocean. But the beautiful thing is that the process of building that house of cards is the process of quieting the storm. And as a psychiatrist, it's a privilege to be a part of that healing every day. But as always, I'm interested in learning from you. If you or a loved one have been through this process of healing, what was it like for you? What helped? And
So that's Dr. Adam Howard, and that's his handle. So when I talk about limerence, and I talk about, because that's like the borderline personality disorder, it's not as frightening when you say limerence, because you can relate to infatuation, you can relate to fantasy, but like I said, when that fantasy becomes limerent, when it becomes an obsession, whereas with fantasy, it's more of karma because it's an action, but it's a healthy action in terms of developing a safer self. So when I worked in Utah, and the thing is, like, I don't want to say I accidentally stumbled into it. I'd been working with youth as a university student in northern Alberta, and the reality of it is, like, there was so much promiscuity with the youth, and this was like decades and decades ago, and the youth had to, and see, the youth could talk to us because we were younger too, but they didn't trust adults because the adults were sexually abusing them. There was a 15-year-old tall guy, like must have been about 6 foot at 15, who was he was having an affair with a mom, like in her 40s. There was a young girl, I think she was 12. She was, like, again, being sexually abused by a 25-year-old. All these things these children talked about, but yet for us as workers to even try to get, to how would we say it? We couldn't press charges because, again, those children were establishing trust with them. And so whatever discourse or whatever they felt that they needed to talk to us about, there would be no support system in place once we left. Okay, so like I said, it was a really difficult environment to work in. And as a result of that, I ended up that following fall working for Utah State Hospital with high-risk suicide girls, and understanding, like trying to understand this whole point of things that like when I talk about identity and the self, and it's not something with a magic wand that all of a sudden you're healed. This is this invalidation of the self. And that's why when I talk about Indian residential school and I talk about trauma and genocide, I talk about oppression and coercive control. People who were taught this in Indian residential school, even when they were trying to define themselves and get some validation, those white people, those people who were actually sexually assaulting the kids, made a very unstable environment. And those children were had no definition of self. And again, when I talk about balancing, having the ability to balance your central nervous system based on thought. I don't know if you've seen the show, what is it called? Dune, Dune, where you have fractions or planets that are fighting for this spice, that full space. There's one planet where they have these logical people. They're sort of like the consultants for these leaders, and so they're always clicking and calculating, and so why am I bringing that up is because they're basically training themselves to balance their central nervous system so that they can logically help people who are in distress. I mean, it seems obscure because it's a science fiction, but it has some parallels to this whole way of thriving or we're not thriving, and what, like the all good or all bad scenario, because that's what it feels like sometimes when I'm talking to women who are so who are so dysregulated because there's so much dopamine in them. I mean, I've had to ask questions like, "What are you doing today?" or what are you doing right now? Just at the moment, they can't even comprehend on what they're doing at the moment they're talking to me. And I'm saying, okay, listen to me. I'm going to ask the question again. What are you doing right now? And they have to think about it. I'm going, no, you, like, do you have a cup of coffee in your hand? Like, what are you doing right now at that moment? Because they've been just to actually sit and regulate your central nervous system and take a deep breath, because you're so overwhelmed with this dopamine, because you're looking for oxytocin, okay, as women. You're trying to find somebody that's going to help you and guide you through this maze of looking at yourself. And so, again, who to trust? Like again, this whole, like I had the analogy in terms of mental health. One of the analogies, like this guy used the analogy of like trying to make a house out of a deck of cards on a ship that's being tossed around in the ocean. Like, that's how difficult it is to actually, get focus on your own narrative, the self-reflection of childhood. So sometimes when I talk about accountability or consent, we have to look at the age groups, like from 5 years under, from 5 to 15, like in decades, or even in five years. Like, so the deconstructing of the self and understanding what happened to make you who you are today, and the support system that you have in place. A lot of times when I listen to people who talk about limerence, especially women on TikTok, I find that it's so easy to think like, okay, I have the solution, and this, apply to this, apply to that. It's not that easy. Like, really, I wouldn't trust anybody who's on TikTok who's promoting themselves about limerence. This is a very highly technical process that needs skilled people like mental health workers who are not coercive control freaks either. Like I try and say to people, they don't teach this in college or university. I said, but once you get, if you get your degree in social work or psychology, and then you have to get a master's to, be practicing. A lot of times they weed you out in the master's program, and they don't tell you. Mind you, throughout my academic life, I've had people, coercive people, trying to say to me, well, you wouldn't be a good therapist. Not that I wanted to be. I'm not, okay? It's just the whole notion of that, like I said, the Psychology Association of Canada is poo-poo, especially when you have Indigenous people and Black people trying to publish papers about systemic racism within the mental health construct in Canada. Oh, So anyway, my whole point in all of this is like, you have to shop around, and you have to understand too, there's more to limerence or eliminating self-defeating behavior, or even tackling another analogy would be, I've used a couple, but another analogy would be having a broken leg and walking on it for a mile to get help. It's painful. The whole process of sharing your most intimate feelings, desires, fantasies with another human being is, if you can do that and you can find trust and safety with that individual, hats off to yourself and that other individual, because damn it, it's so hard. Life is not easy when it comes to dealing with, especially if you're a dopamine addict or an oxytocin addict. In other words, especially if you're male or female. That's just the brunt of it. You just have to deal with it, because sometimes, like, everybody's got full of good intentions, but when the good intentions are doing more harm to the people you love and the people you care about, what can you do? A lot of times it takes invisible helping hands to get you to a place where you feel comfortable. And throughout my life, I've had that, but I strongly and totally believe that the reason I've had so many invisible helping hands for me is I made a decision. Like when I was 22, 23, I just said no. Whatever behavior I'd already established in my life of being controlled coercively, or being targeted, and just being sexual female, and people trying to oppress my sexuality, whatever that sexuality is. I said, that's why I say the baseline bisexual. If you have that as a baseline and you're deconstructing your identity, then that helps you have some clarity into who you are, because we are all different. We are not the same. And sometimes it's scary. It's scary when you see somebody and you realize, my goodness, what kind of life did they live before you met them? And that's just a stranger that you happen to bump into and happen to trust. Because that trust opens up a whole, like, it's like a magic lamp, a genie in a lamp. You rub the lamp and this genie appears. And you're like, I didn't know that was in that lamp. Again, I think if you do a lot of self-work, a lot of understanding of yourself, your identity, what defines you in life, how things in life changed you, and again, how from being stable to, again, defining your life as stability. Unstable is you're unable to do that. When you find yourself unable to do that, you have to have trust in someone to guide you. And that's why I think it's so important for people who've gone through these things, like hands-on experience, that it helps in the recovery. It helps in the recovery because there's another human being that doesn't have all the laureates of PhD, bachelors, all that. They don't have that. They are just human beings who are gifted with healing that can help you. When I talk about invisible helping hands, when I talk about being Indigenous, when I'm talking about the whole notion of our life that has been handed down in our cultures to help us, to feed us, to nurture us, it's validating. It's validating, and the more people you trust, the better you have in your life. I'm grateful that I've grown up in an Indigenous community, that throughout my life I've known so many people, hundreds of people, that I've grown up in my community. And for me, when I left and I was in the United States, it was so hard because I was ripped from my community, and I did it deliberately so I could get an education, not understanding, exactly the forces that were bringing me back into my community. The understanding of the self is so vital. And for those reasons too, when I listen to Indigenous people, young people who are advocating, who are activists, who are promoting an understanding and trying to educate themselves as well as others about systemic racism, it's empowering. It's empowering to know that we're all coming from the same platform. There are Indigenous men who are fighting to self-determination of what they will not tolerate. Some Indigenous young men have never touched alcohol or drugs. You know, some, like for me, for not being sexually active, it's like that. I just, like, what's the matter? Why don't people want to accept, you know, what we as human beings have decided how we want to live? Because we don't fit the norm. We don't fit the norm of like, oh, well, you know, you should be having an affair with a married man, or you should be with a woman, or you shoulda, woulda, coulda. It's hard. It's not easy. I tell you, it's not easy. For me, I'm grateful for this podcast. And I called up a friend of mine the other day and I said, I have to go to Costco. And it might seem ridiculous to you, but for me, I'm handicapped, okay? So for me, I have to get in my car, and then I have to take my wheelchair out of the car, and then I get groceries, and I have to have somebody help me put my groceries in my car as well as my wheelchair. I have to come home, take out my groceries, and it's a chore. It's a chore. So when I call my friend, I'm going, I had to really not talk myself out of not going, because I know how hard it is for me being handicapped. When I wasn't, it was, you know, I didn't have to fight myself to do something. So that's why I'm saying the relationship we have with ourselves and other people is important, because then they know what your struggles are, and they know what your capacity is. So again, this whole notion of trust, I think for me, I spent most of my life just trusting people who were mental health workers, and realizing, no, I had to start trusting people who didn't have that background of being therapists or psychologists or social workers. I don't know why I gravitated to people like that, but because of that, and I'm not saying like they weren't helpful to me, but I did a lot of work myself, and that's the whole point, is like you have to do the homework. You have to do the homework, not in the sense of getting the instructions from the individual. You know, you have your gut feeling, and you know what you have to work on. Okay, so I don't know if I have any more videos that I want to.
Because I did a class.
Okay, here's this woman here is interesting too, because here.
Funny, because I did a class called Trauma as a Gateway, Kink as a Bridge, right? So trauma.
Oh shit, that's a good title. We need to pause on that for a minute.
Yeah.
Trauma is a gateway, kink is a bridge.
Yeah,
okay.
trauma as a gateway.
Could you just explain the title and what that means?
Yeah, so for some folks, trauma can be a gateway to kink. Whether or not something that happened to you later on found that same thing turned you on. Mm-hmm. Whether or not what happened to you, you're now navigating that through kink as a way to now have some control. Mm. Whether or not something that happened to you, you're now replaying that same thing and re-traumatizing yourself, right? Mm-hmm. Because what I found is that when we were wanting to destigmatize kink, and a lot of it's like, okay, people who are kinky are not more traumatized than others. Valid. That does not mean that sometimes those two aren't connected. You don't want people to begin to think that it's trauma that's causing kink, but for some people it does. Mm. And we don't want to minimize that experience because we're trying not to, we're trying not to re-stigmatize. So that was the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, is for those people who does, you still matter. Does that mean that you're less kinky? Because it's data. It's just fucking data. We don't have to make it something else. We just get to know that this is a part of your story. Now what do you want to do with that information? It's funny because I did a class called Trauma as a Gateway, Kink as a Bridge, right? So trauma...
So that author or that social media is DOCYUROC period YULINDARENE. And again, that's with TikTok, I think. Yeah, so trauma is a gateway. Kink is, let's see, trauma is a gateway. Kink is a bridge. So it's an episode called BOUDOIR After Dark. Bordeaux After Dark. So and so like comments instead of being afraid of situations that hurt you, your brain made it sexy so that it doesn't hurt you. One of the reasons, indeed, you never. Yeah, it's just like some people. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna use. It's just like she says. One of the reasons, indeed, you never fucking know how people get where they are. Geez, so it's like here, not me wanting a 5-fingered necklace a few years after my abusive ex and dad on 2 different occasions tried to hurt me in the same way. So again, and recognizing and options, whether you show signs or your choices before. I hope, like I don't know, I just find it's interesting that, like, again, however you get, we'll say, your kink on by talking about it, it's important to trust the person that you're talking about your kinks, because the kinkiness of your sexual life is the bridge to wellness. That's why I'm saying it's important to trust people. And there's so many invisible helping hands. That's why I said, I think once I started talking about or releasing the narrative of why I was warning people about Nathan Chasing Horse, changed my narrative in the sense of trust, because there were so many people who in terms of lateral violence, that I think I gravitated more to like social workers, therapists, and psychologists because I could trust them. But the reality of it is that kink this lady's talking about, we need that kink, especially if we've come from a place where we've had trauma. Now, I'm not trying to minimize my trauma. I'm just saying there are things in my life that haven't been very debilitating. There are things in my life whereas I've met white women who, like, I couldn't even comprehend how as a child they could have gone through such things, such secrecy, such naivete about the self, and then to want to help and be a therapist, it just doesn't hold water to me, and again. For me, when I say the kinkiness about it is like, for the individual white woman, it's the voyeur, the voyeur of my talking about my kink, and they're like looking in without ever having experienced that connection as a whole human being, because they've oppressed it. They've oppressed that trauma in their childhood. That's why I say when you start going into, you want to be a therapist, they're going to weed you out when you're in your master's program. And worse of all, if there's white systemic racism in that, you don't even bother. Don't even bother. Go to some university or some other place where they will validate you because you're a minority. Go and seek out, like, again, just now, 2026, we have a Lakota doctor, a Lakota physician who is trying to establish a medical school for Indigenous students so we can graduate more Indigenous doctors. Why do we have these things? Because systemic racism. Sometimes even when I'm invited to talk to a group of people in the art community, and I start talking about identity and what it is to be Indigenous, and through ritual and ceremony for not just 500 years, I'm talking 10, 20,000 years. And rather than being domesticated, like with the cows and sheep and, like stuff that Europeans had to live through, all the dark ages of unsanitary, like fleas and rats and plagues, and even that 100 years where they had no drinking water and they all drank ale, and so many generations of FASE, and then they bring it into this world here where we've never had domesticated animals. We chased our prey down. We were hunters and gatherers, and through ceremony, through understanding kinship, through collective and holistic ways of healing, we have developed and we became natural blood donors, O-type donors. Our bloodline is so rare. That's why I'm saying the first 500 years ago, the first 100 years, they killed 5 generations of our children because our bodies biologically were not set up to deal with all those diseases that were brought into the Americas. You even can look at historical radar maps in the Amazon of the thousands of civilizations that were killed off and annihilated, with the jungle, just eating it all up so you can't see it. All the pyramids in the Americas, all the oppression. Like if a lie based on a lie makes you feel like you're great and that you've always been great and you want to keep on oppressing and establishing systemic racism without understanding the root cause of why you were so intimidated by another, like a way of life. We're living on a planet where a lot of things that we've sort of domesticated, I'm talking European patriarchy, is dangerous. Look at the data centers and all the water it's going to use. Look at the oil sands in northern Alberta. Look at all the forest fires. Our forests are brittle because of the dryness, because our groundwater is being soaked up. Think about it. The 8 billion people on this planet that have to be fed because we're domesticating our food. It comes into so many conspiracy theories. It gets sickening. It gets sickening. And for me, as an elder woman who has actually grown on the land, who's actually had to kill animals to eat, I can't even comprehend our young people. The lack of critical thinking. And I'm not saying just children. I know trauma creates like a barrier in terms of critical thinking. That's why it's so important to heal. So important to sensitize yourself instead of desensitize. It's important to feel, even to have fantasy. Like it's important to live your whole life as the best way you can. So, but I enjoy doing my podcasts, and again, I didn't realize, like, I have so many people that I meet that have been letting other people to come and listen to my podcast. So again, it's Saturday, it's August. I can hardly see the Rockies, but yet I'm just glad that at least I've had my breakfast and my tea, and I'm gonna sit back and watch a movie and hopefully go and see a movie in a theater today. So with that, I hope you're doing well. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you'll meet someone who's going to be a catalyst that's going to turn your life around or even help you nudge you in the right direction.